government enshrined protections are not real. Rights that we, as we know them, are just things that we recognize as things of value to us. So for instance, I usually define it as simply, you have a right to speak freely. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked, you can say whatever you want. You have a right to keep and bear arms. Pick up a stick, sharpen it, pointy stick, you can defend yourself. Ain't no one going to stop you. The question is, when you get into conflict with someone else, where is that line drawn? So the reality is, rights are recognized as things that we can and must do to survive and maximize potential.
I think rights are force, and I think that...
You think rights are force?
Government
rights
protections.
What do you mean rights are force?
You're talking about government protection.
No, I'm talking about period. I'll explain what I mean. A right to me is an entitlement absent duty. That's a right. Okay, you're entitled to it, but you have no duty.
What does that mean?
It means that you have it. So, like, okay,
entitlement to speak.
Yeah. So if you have a right to own a gun,
to speak.
No, hang on. Let me finish. If you have a right to own a gun, do you have a duty to own a gun?
But do you have a duty to speak?
No, you don't have a duty to speak.
If you have a right to vote, do you have a duty to vote?
So right, so it'd be an entitlement.
That's your argument.
It's an entitlement,
but
absent a duty.
But you can speak.
Yeah, you can.
And so
until you can't,
the question
until somebody stops you with force.
So you're talking about government restrictions are made up by us as a people.
Just people can adhere to your rights without any form of government. If you're walking down the street and you speak, and a guy turns around and smacks you in the mouth and breaks your jaw, right? He has now used force against whatever this right you think you have to speak. You have no right to do shit except whatever you can enforce. Right. Your mechanism is force, and the mechanism against you is force.
And so
all rights are force.
You're talking about government protections, not rights.
No, I'm talking about rights. What is a right?
So it is an intrinsic moral function.
Well, okay.
Or
intrinsic meaning what?
It means if again, I'll try to explain. If you're born and you live in the middle of the woods, there are things you can do. You can hunt for food. You can defend yourself. You can speak freely. Now, what we've done in the United States
unless you're born blind and you can't talk. Right? Then where does your right to speak come from?
You lack the ability to speak,
right?
But you still have the means by which you are allowed to do it.
Yeah, but what makes it?
That's just not true. That can't be the case. The idea that rights are intrinsic that can't be the case, right? Rights to me are just things that we've decided that will be optimal to getting to the goal of everyone having a good life, a fulfilling life, and having a satisfactory life. These are rights, okay? So rights to education, rights to free speech. If you allow people to say what they want, we can clarify more and get to the truth of the matter, right? Right, the idea that rights are intrinsic. What part of like existence does rights exist? Does it exist in our mind? Which part, you can't make that argument is intrinsic to us. It just makes no sense. How would you even develop that argument? Where does it exist when it's intrinsic then? The argument makes no sense. It's just things that are made up because we believe they are the best ways for us to optimize and maximize happiness generally.
An intrinsic right to be able to do, like, where does this idea come from other than you axiomatically kind of just say, you say because I can do something, I have the right to do something?
It's part of a evolutionary biological structure that resulted in the survival of humanity.
So if I grab a spear and I can stab somebody with it, I have a right to?
No, that's attacking somebody. That's violating.
Yeah, but other than an axiom of you shouldn't do that because I just don't feel like you should, what makes it intrinsic that I don't do that?
That you don't go and kill another person?
Yeah.
So the way I view rights would be things that and again, there's a debate over what rights are.
Yeah, let's start with that. What are they?
No. So there, it's honestly difficult to define, but it is certain moral structures or.
I would say axioms. Would you agree with that? Just an axiom. So, like, you have inalienable rights from God according to the Constitution. This is an axiomatic principle. It means this is our philosophical starting point. Is that we have these.
I would put it as things that were required or greatly beneficial to the survival of an individual that we greatly benefit.
I agree.
Yes, that's it. Is on the right track. Okay. Andrew right now is making really good arguments, really good counter to it. Considering the guy's religious, he's actually very lenient when it comes to, it doesn't necessarily come from God. It just things that will make up socially, right? He's on the right track, but earlier he said intrinsic. No. Now he's on the right track. He's getting it now.
benefit. I just don't know what makes them intrinsic, or like
That's
you're
it.
born with them or something like this, other than we just kind of agree to it.
So I think the restrictions we kind of agree to. And some people might view some things as rights and other things not as rights. Like the left thinks healthcare is a human right, which makes literally no sense.
No sense.
But in terms of your ability to speak, you can walk around, you can speak, to defend yourself, you can pick up a stick, you can defend
But
yourself.
this goes back to the same argument. I can grab a spear and murder somebody. I can do that. Why don't I have a right to do that?
Because you are now causing harm to another person, which is a detriment.
But why
to
is that valuable?
human-
Why are other people valuable?
Yeah, well, why would that be an intrinsic value? So, like, I can
One
envision
would
a
result in the
planet,
end of
for
humanity,
instance-
and one results in the expansion of humanity.
That's the
Well, no,
point.
both can result in the expansion of humanity.
Right, but absolutely not. You're completely wrong.
No, I'm completely right.
You are wrong. Self-defense can result in expansion of humanity if you're using destruction for the purpose of ending something that is destructive. But if you are wantonly going around murdering people, you're actively reducing and harming humanity.
Well, okay, but that doesn't mean
So it
that you
doesn't-
couldn't expand humanity by harming people. There's
So
nations
the argument
that do
of
this all the
self-defense
time.
is there are things that we believe we must be able to do for the betterment and survival of humanity.
Yeah, but when I'm asking you this question, right? I'm asking the foundation from which you say I have the right to speak or write.
We
or
need to be able to in
things like
order to
this.
survive.
You,
You see that right there? We need to be able to survive. That's where everything starts from. Generally, when I said earlier, it's just how can we maximize the survival probability of humans in general. That's typically how every right comes from. Okay, you can't kill this person unjustifiably. Now that person can live a long life if they don't actually interfere or try to kill someone. Like, that's typically where all the rights come from. And earlier, when it was talking about, well, it's not good to harm someone. Why shouldn't I do that? Because you're reducing human population. There's a possibility you can reduce human population. Okay, why is it that human population being reduced, why is that a bad thing? Why is it that we shouldn't strive to reduce human population? That's the next question. Why is it like that question will always go back? Okay, why is this the case? Why shouldn't I hurt someone? Because you're violating their rights. Why is violating someone's right wrong? Because you're hurting them. Why is hurting someone wrong? Because you could kill them. Why is killing someone wrong? Because you could reduce the population. Why is reducing population wrong? You can always go back. There is no intrinsic foundation that you get to where you're like, yes, this is it. This is absolutely the answer that answers all the human rights question. There isn't. It's always starting axiomatically and randomly from somewhere, and then from there we can develop rights. That there is no other way to ever judge that. Even people that are Christians, like Andrew, he understands that.
Because you need to do something.
So
I'm not sure how that means you have a right to it, though.
Okay, so speech is not
Like, you have
just
to
saying
eat.
words.
You have
Speech
a
is-
right to eat.
Yes, 100%.
Really? You have a right to do that?
Why would you?
Yes,
not
you don't have a right to
do
own
that?
So
food,
if I had-
but you have a right to eat, otherwise you'll die.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Do you have a right to breathe? What about breathing?
These are good questions, right?
Again, I don't think you understand. We're talking about intrinsic behaviors that are required for survival versus the government and humans deciding what we shouldn't have.
I
on
don't think we're
laws.
speaking past each other. I'm asking what makes them intrinsic. When you say I have a right to eat, okay?
If you don't, you'll die.
If you have if that guy has all the food over there, you no longer have a
We
right
are
to
not
eat.
talking about your right to steal from others. If
Yeah,
you are
so you
standing
no longer
in
have
the
a right
woods
to
by
eat?
if you're standing in the woods by yourself, eat that mushroom.
Okay, got it. You can eat the mushroom.
Uh-huh.
But what makes it a right to eat that mushroom, and what makes it not a right for a guy standing next to the mushroom to say,
Okay, we're
I have a
talking- we're talking
gun
about laws.
and I don't want
Okay,
you
wait,
to
hold
eat
on.
that mushroom?
You're now once again talking about laws and restrictions.
Yeah, okay, but my whole theory is that rights themselves are force, and that's all they ever are. It's just your ability to use force to do thing you want to do.
I think you're just making
you call
an
that a
argument
right.
I call rights things that are essential to the survival of humanity.
So you have a right to your heart beating and your blood flowing and to blink and to.
Yes.
Okay, so if you
So
just
now you misunderstand because once again you're talking about government again.
how is this government? It doesn't need to be government.
If you are standing in the middle of the woods and your heart is beating, your heart has a right to beat. If your heart fails and you die, you died. If you're making an argument that someone should or should not be allowed to do something is an entirely a human social construct.
I agree.
Right. I'm saying that the reason we have protections of rights is because we've determined certain things are required for the reasonable survival and expansion of humanity.
Yeah, I
These
agree. We
things-
agree to those things, and we act as though they're rights.
And the Bill of Rights,
but I don't think rights themselves exist.
The Bill of Rights is a recognition of certain things that we do for the betterment of survival that must be protected from government. Now, if you want to argue the amendments in the Bill of Rights are nonsensical, fine. If you want to have a moral argument or philosophical argument about what is required or intrinsic to the survival of humanity, by all means have that argument. But rights do exist. It just means some you might not agree with and some you might think aren't. Those are philosophical debates.
Yeah, but
That's the thing, though. That's what Andrew is actually trying to find out. It is the philosophical part of that debate. That exactly is what he's trying to find out. Like, philosophically, where does it come from? Where does it exist? That's the debate he's trying to have.
when you say exist, right? Do you mean outside of your brain they exist, or do they only exist as a construction of your mind where you say, I have a right to do X?
If we observe creatures in the wild, we will see them required to do things to survive.
Yeah. Okay. So
If you inhibit those things, they will die.
so if just rights
protect
to you,
those things.
So do rights to you just mean things which are a requirement for your existence?
And typically we define them as such because they transcend the basic obvious things like breathing and drinking water.
Owning a gun isn't a requirement to your existence.
No, defending yourself is.
Yeah, but
If a bear comes and you're in the middle of the woods and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you cease to exist and humans cease to exist. So humans do defend themselves. Then as human society, we've decided this should be protected. Otherwise, humans will cease to exist.
Yeah, but why? Okay, but this makes no sense, right? So
Certainly does.
if all right is to you, Tim, is thing X which is necessary for the survival of a man, in this case blinking and breathing and eating and pooping and whatever, the right to poop shall not be under, because you have a right to do that because it's like something you need to do to be alive.
Right, but you
Okay?
can't poop on someone's floor.
Why
or in
couldn't
their
you
house.
extend that to literally everything? You need healthcare to survive. You need guns
You have
to
a
survive.
right to
You need
access-
a house to survive. You
So
need
once
everything
again,
to survive.
I think we should move on, but I think the challenge is, I don't know if you're unwilling to understand or what. You have no right to take other things from other people, to take their labor. You have no right to force a doctor to perform surgery on you, but you certainly have a right to ask him for it.
Those are just assertions. Like, you just assert these things as though they have a grounding epistemic foundation from which.
That's the problem. There's no epistemic foundation to it, number one. And number two, earlier, he says that having healthcare is not a right. Okay, but then on the other hand, they said rights are things that you need for you to survive. Okay, so what if someone doesn't have money to be able to pay for healthcare to survive? Which one does it fit into then? Does that mean I don't have the right to survive? Or does it mean I do have the right to survive? Even though you do believe healthcare shouldn't be a right. Like, which one is it? Like, is healthcare a right? Which means I have to survive? Because you did just say surviving is part of the rights that you have. So if healthcare is needed for me to survive, why shouldn't I have rights? Why shouldn't I have rights to healthcare? Like, it's definitely conflating
Which
both.
you can make the assertion. Based on where do you make the assertion that you're not allowed to do X other than because Tim Pool's preference is that you don't?
And I'm literally saying you're talking about laws and social order right now, not human behaviors for survival.
I think human behaviors are laws and social orders. I think that's this. You're saying the same thing.
No, if a person was in the middle of the woods, they'd be foraging and looking for food.
Yeah. What does that have to do with what I just said?
You're talking
When
about what the government
human
can and can't do. I'm talking about what humans need to do to survive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, humans also have to have other humans around to survive.
And so this is communication is essential. The right to defend yourself is essential. The right to secure your possessions is essential. These things, without them, humans cease to function properly. And then you get the Soviet bloc, you get starvation, you get genocides.
It's
and
also
this is a
just
detriment
it's
to.
a function of our belief system in the United States that we have natural rights. I mean,
I agree with that.
that's a huge part of
I
it.
agree with that. I agree with
that-
that in the
that came
United
out of
States,
nowhere.
we agree that
But I
we
think
have
that
them.
You can say, I think you can
Not
say that
sure that we
everyone,
do.
I think that you can say that everyone has these rights, and it's a function of whether or not their government allows the rights to be recognized.
That's the contention. When you
So-
say, I think everybody has these rights.
Yeah, that is my belief.
Yeah, it's a belief
Yeah,
based on
based on existence. I mean,
based on just your preferences.
So there's.
I don't think it's a preference. I think everyone has a right to breathe. And
in the
blink.
and you do in the big picture of what are the list of fundamental rights that exist to humans, cultures debate these things wildly, but there are a small handful which are true and correct. If inhibited, a person dies.
Agreed. But what I'm saying, I guess my overarching point, and I can just kind of tie
Or
it off
society
with this,
fails.
is that when I say rights are forced, what I'm saying is the thing that you say is necessary, breathing, eating, these types of things. I think that those things, which you call rights, really are just force. You're saying I will use force in order to do this thing that I want to do to necessarily exist, and that another person can use force to stop those things from existing.
And then
If-
you can use force to stop them.
Right, and then you can use force, et cetera,
you
et
have a
cetera.
right to
But all we're
self-defense.
really doing is just moving the goalpost of force around, right? So if this group says this group does not have the right to breathe, they do not have the right to eat, they do not have the right to do any of this shit, and they go and put a stop to it.
But you don't-
What
but
are we
that group-
appealing to for
but that
why it
group
is that you
doesn't-
can't do that?
That group doesn't have the right to do
Yeah,
that.
but that makes no
That's-
sense.
Like
Why
you're
wouldn't they
saying-
have the
you're
right to do
saying-
that?
That's the question.
I feel
you're
like-
saying might makes right, which is a
Well, it's
perspective.
beyond that. I think you're making
It
a
makes.
postmodernist argument for why you should be allowed to do things that other people don't want you to do.
I think I think the opposite is true.
I'm making
I would use a justification of God, and I would appeal to something which is unchanging and an unchanging standard for moral justifications
That's
for
where
oughts.
religion comes
But
in.
what you're doing when you say a right and you're appealing to like the Constitution, that's postmodernist subjective standards of nonsense, right? It's just like
No, it's moral
we all
foundation.
decided that we have these rights, so we do. There's no justification for any of them.
so
Zero.
you don't believe in any intrinsic moral foundations?
No, I do believe in intrinsic moral foundations and epistemic justifications and ontological justifications, which would come from God.
I think you're doing deconstructivist reasoning to argue why.
It's just basic philosophy. It has nothing to do with deconstruction or postmodernism.
It is very, very basic. At the end of the day, if you're not religious, you can't make any epistemic foundation to knowledge about knowing about right or wrong. You really can't. You will struggle, okay? At the end of the day, you telling someone, I have the right to do this, to own all this stuff that I have, that's fine. But guess what? I believe I have the right because I'm hungry to take some of your food. Well, guess what? It is what it is. No one is able to dispute that and settle it for us because there's nothing you can ever refer to that will absolutely objectively tell us who's right and who's wrong. There really isn't anything, okay? I believe I have the right to what you have. You believe you have the right to what you have. That's fine, but if I can take it, I'll take it. What happens? Nothing.
Basic philosophy, you have to have a justification for a position.
And when I've given you one, you just reject it every
Yeah,
time.
well,
You just say,
because
nope,
because
nope.
they're axiomatic. So you haven't demonstrated why the axiom or the starting point. We start with rights, Andrew. You haven't demonstrated why we do, other than
You die.
because I observe that if we don't act in this way, you expire. But it's like, okay, but why is that even bad? Like, why is that even a
Thank you.
bad thing?
Yeah,
Why is it bad that humans cease to exist?
Yeah, why would that even
Yes,
be a
that's
bad
the
thing from the
question.
worldview of rights? Like, oh, okay, if you don't have this right, you die. But you haven't justified why that's even a bad thing.
Because humans exist through a pattern of evolution towards, or creation, whichever you decide, for to be fruitful, to bear fruit, and etc.
Where did that come
These
from?
things are components of creation and life. I think this aligns perfectly with like a Christian, Judeo-Christian moral worldview, and I think these things are requirements for the efficient expansion and fruitfulness of humans. So they are natural. Either from an evolutionary standpoint, humans developed to inherit certain requirements to function efficiently, and when these things are curtailed, we see inefficiency and collapse, disease and chaos.
This is circular. So
How?
you go, okay, we need to bear fruit and multiply. Why? Well, because then we can exist.
'Cause God
why do
said
we
so.
need to exist? Because then we can bear fruit and multiply. Okay, but why? Because then we can
Okay,
exist.
you're just being contrarian for no reason.
No, it's not contrarian.
No,
I'm giving.
it's actually making a very, very good point. This is an outstanding point he's actually making. This absolutely is circular. We need to survive. We need things to survive. All right, okay. Why? Because if we don't have these things to survive, we cease to exist. Okay. Why is it that existence is good? So we can have these things when we survive. Okay, why do we need to survive? Because if we don't survive, we're going like you're just going back in circles. You can't do that. He's making an amazing point.
Giving you a real
You
principle.
believe in God?
Yeah, I'm a
So
Christian.
if I say God gives you a mandate,
Christian.
so when God says has a mandate to be fruitful and multiply, do you say yes or no?
Yo, of course,
Are there certain characteristics and behaviors that result in benefit and in more efficient, fruitful multiplying?
of course.
Aren't the, so are
That's
those
divine,
that's-
but this is hang on. This is divine command. Justification from divine command has nothing to do with libertarian nonsense of constitutional egalitarianism.
I think instead of having a discussion on the merits of what rights might mean, you're instead upset over what libertarians think rights might mean, as opposed to what I'm actually trying to say.
Okay, well, do you justify rights as coming from God?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then we're fine there. But so I think we actually agree. So then, if that is the case, if whatever you think rights are come from God, then whatever else we're appealing to external to God for where a right comes
There's
from
no point to it.
isn't really a right, right? It's not really a right.
I think that life, goodness, creation, there is deep overlap. I think a simple way to look at it is, yin yang, within good there is some evil, within evil there is some good. And a way to explain that is sometimes we have to destroy to create. What does that mean? If there's a mass murderer who's murdering children, we don't want to, but we stop that person to defend ourselves and others' lives.
At the end of the day, right, he started with random libertarian worldview, and then he accepted, okay, yeah, God, and now he's going back to like, there's no point. Like he's kind of like removed himself from his original position, and then moved on to divine command from God, and now he's trying to justify yet again libertarian worldview. It's very, very odd, like kind of all over the place. Couldn't provide any justification, but that's just my thoughts. If you're new to the channel, it would be massively appreciated if you drop a like on the video and also subscribe.